Before he became one of the most decorated infantry officers to serve in 3 separate wars, Logan Weston stood alone in his bedroom with a revolver against his own head. His hunting partner's family was starving. His co-workers kept dying in mining accidents, one crew after another. And Logan Weston, 25 years old, had started to believe that death simply followed him wherever he went. So one evening, he pulled the hammer back. By his own account, a voice told him to stop. He tried to ease off the trigger. The hammer dropped before his hand could obey. The gun didn't fire. He walked outside with that same revolver, aimed at a tree, and pulled the trigger again. This time, it worked perfectly. Weston took that as an answer. Whatever had just happened to him, in his mind, it wasn't chance. Within months, he'd enrolled in Bible school, aiming for a life in the ministry. The Army drafted him out of it in 1941, before he could finish. He would go on to fight in the Pacific, in Burma, in Korea, and in Vietnam, earning 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, several Silver Stars, a Legion of Merit, multiple Bronze Stars for valor, and by most tallies, 6 Purple Hearts. His own men gave him a nickname that stuck for the rest of his life, the Fighting Preacher. Everything that follows is drawn from his Distinguished Service Cross citation, Army unit histories, oral history recordings, and his own 1992 memoir. This is one man's paper trail across 3 wars, and it barely fits in one video. Logan Ernest Weston was born January 5, 1914, the eldest of 5 children. The family moved constantly: Ohio, Michigan, Idaho, Pennsylvania, chasing whatever work the Depression hadn't already taken. He left school after 8th grade to work: farming, mining, sawmilling, appliance repair, whatever paid. Night school got him the education the Depression had cost him. In 1939, at 25, he enrolled in the very first class of Transylvania Bible School in Pennsylvania, the oldest student among just 9. January 3, 1941. A draft notice interrupted his 3rd year of theological study. Private Weston reported to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, assigned to heavy weapons in the 145th Regiment, 37th Infantry Division. He made staff sergeant within a year. Pearl Harbor put his unit on the Mississippi River and the Gulf Coast, watching for an invasion that never came. June 1942 sent the division to the South Pacific, first Fiji, training under Fijian scouts who could apparently sneak into a fully guarded American camp at night and mark sleeping men's throats with grease pencils to prove the point. Guadalcanal came next, in April of 1943, mostly mop-up duty by then. Somewhere in that stretch, Weston received a battlefield commission to 2nd lieutenant. New Georgia, July 1943, was worse. His unit ended up encircled at a position the men grimly nicknamed Starvation Ridge, surrounded, cut off, rationing down to whatever could be scavenged off the jungle floor or the bodies of dead Japanese soldiers. They held. Weston came out the other side of it still standing, and immediately volunteered for something else entirely. A classified, high-risk mission nobody would explain until he signed up. Late August 1943 put him on a ship out of New Caledonia, one of roughly 650 combat veterans pulled from across the Pacific Theater, all of them battle-tested already, which made the group unusual before it even had a name. They reached Bombay that October. 4 months of training followed, deep in India, built around British-style long-range jungle penetration tactics. By the time it was finished, the unit had a designation, the 5307th Composite Unit, provisional, and a commander, Brigadier General Frank Merrill. History would remember them as Merrill's Marauders. Weston made first lieutenant and took command of the 3rd Battalion's intelligence and reconnaissance platoon. The scouts, the guys walking miles ahead of 3,000 men to find the enemy before the enemy found them. He picked his own 55 men, and by more than one account, he specifically looked for soldiers with some kind of religious conviction. He wanted men who believed something was watching over them. In a fight like the one coming, that wasn't a small thing to ask for. March 1944, the village of Walawbum. Weston's platoon forded the Numpiek River to secure the battalion's flank, and found themselves surrounded by an estimated 90 Japanese soldiers on the wrong side of that water. A Nisei interpreter attached to the unit listened in on the enemy's own shouted orders and translated them in real time, letting Weston shift his machine guns to meet each new attack before it fully formed. Mortar support from across the river sealed the gap. The platoon withdrew, wounded, carried out on improvised litters. Not one man lost. Weeks later, near Nepumga, his platoon force marched 35 miles and then built 8 separate delaying positions, strung out across 8 miles of mountain trail, holding off a force the size of an entire enemy regiment, long enough to screen 2 full American battalions from being cut off completely. Hit and run, fall back, hit again. It worked. But the entire campaign was extracting its price regardless. Rations meant to last 5 days were stretched to 9. Leeches, monsoon rot in every boot, malaria, dysentery, typhus, moving through the ranks like a second enemy nobody could shoot back at. April 1944, the siege of Nepumga itself. An entire battalion surrounded for roughly 2 weeks by Japanese forces 3 or 4 times their size. Weston's 3rd Battalion fought through 12 days of resistance to break the siege and pull their trapped comrades out. A Bronze Star followed. In May, the Marauders took the airfield at Mysitkina in a surprise assault that finally ended the campaign. The cost by then, 93 killed, close to 300 wounded, and nearly 2,000 cases of disease, serious enough to evacuate a man from the field. The unit that started this campaign, roughly 3,000 strong, came out the other side with barely 200 still able to fight. Weston himself went from 183 pounds to 119. He carried recurring malaria home with him. Discharged, he went back to the ministry he'd left half-finished, pastoring a small church in southwestern Pennsylvania from 1945 to 1948, completing his theology degree by mail in whatever hours a small-town pastor actually has to spare. On February 14, 1948, Valentine's Day, he married Mary Patterson. They'd stay married for the rest of his life. Peacetime didn't last. By early 1950, Weston was back on active duty, a captain commanding H Company, 17th Infantry, in occupied Japan. When North Korea invaded the South that June, most of his unit got folded into the 25th Infantry Division and rushed to the collapsing Pusan perimeter. In Taegu, he took command of Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 27th Infantry, the Wolfhounds. On July 24, 1950, near Songfong, with enemy armor bearing down on his position, Weston personally worked a bazooka under fire despite his own injuries, and despite, by his account, temporary hearing loss from the concussion of the fighting around him. It earned him a Silver Star. 10 days later, at Chindong-ni, the North Koreans hit his sector with everything they had. 2 enemy machine gun positions on a nearby hill crest had his men pinned flat, unable to move. Weston picked up an M1 rifle and charged both positions himself, taking them out under direct fire. A bullet caught him in the thigh. He refused evacuation, patched himself up enough to keep functioning, and got back into the fight. Before that day ended, he'd been hit twice more. He stayed anyway. For Chindong-ni, Weston received the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award the Army gives for valor in combat, one rank below the Medal of Honor itself. The citation credits his personal bravery in stabilizing a sector that, by several accounts, came close to being overrun entirely. That November, promoted to major, he moved into a planning and training role with the 27th Infantry as the front shifted north toward the Yalu River, and then, with Chinese intervention, shifted violently back south again. Weston helped hold the lines through that entire reversal. Vietnam came next, from 1964 into 1965, this time as a Green Beret advisor, first with the Military Assistance Advisory Group in Laos, monitoring North Vietnamese construction along what would become the Ho Chi Minh Trail, later with a joint command in Thailand coordinating against Viet Cong incursions. In an unlikely footnote to that tour, Weston helped organize a joint American-Thai parachute demonstration team that toured the country raising money, funding that built 32 new schools, expanded 4 more, and equipped 2 hospitals. Not every legacy from that war looks like this one. Weston retired from the Army in 1968, a full colonel, after 28 years of service across 3 wars. Texas A&M gave him his next chapter, 13 years as secretary of the IMCA and coordinator of campus religious life, while he finished a master's degree and a doctorate in Bible philosophy on the side. He and Mary raised 7 children together. In retirement, the 2 of them volunteered side by side at a Christian counseling service, and by the time he passed, Weston counted 15 grandchildren and 17 great-grandchildren in the family he'd built after nearly being killed by his own hand at 25. In 1992, he published his memoir, The Fightin' Preacher. In it, he wrote about the men he'd killed with a plainness that never tried to dress up what it had cost him. "I'm sorry I had to kill those Japs, fellas, but today it was a case of either my getting them or their getting me." In 1996, the Army inducted Logan Weston into its Ranger Hall of Fame at Fort Benning, Georgia, honoring 23 separate engagements against the enemy during the Burma campaign alone, a fraction of what the man actually did across 3 wars and 28 years. Logan Ernest Weston died on May 5, 2003, in Fort Mill, South Carolina. He was 89 years old. His funeral was held at a small church, the same kind of place he'd once planned to spend his whole life quietly preaching in, before a draft notice and a war, and then 2 more wars, had other plans for him entirely.